In this episode, we are going to tackle the Paparazzi scheduler component. That component is going to allow users to allow frequencies for their paparazzi in a more human-friendly way. And because the only thing that we'll send to our API is a Cron expression, we'll make sure that whatever the user chooses will be passed into a Cron expression. So the Paparazzi scheduler will start with a select form, which will allow the user to choose a frequency. And based on that frequency, it will display or not display certain fields. So for example, if the user chooses once a year, we will ask them the month, the day, the hour, and the minute that they want the screenshot to be taken at. However, if they decide to choose a once a day frequency, then we will only display the hour and the minutes. And we'll also allow the user to manage the Cron expression directly by providing a custom frequency. Okay, so let's start by designing all of the fields that we could potentially have. We'll have a base select field for the frequency. And let's not forget to give it a margin bottom of 6. We'll also have one for the months if they select a yearly frequency, and one for the day of the month. Now if the user chooses a weekly frequency, we'll ask them to select a weekday, so that is Monday, Tuesday, etc. And finally, we'll also ask the user to choose an hour and a minute. And because we already have quite a lot of field now, let's try and group hour and minute together horizontally. So we'll wrap them in a flex container. And just like we did with width and heights on the previous episode, we'll make this flex container a flex call by default and a flex row when we reach the small breakpoint. Then we'll make these two a flex 1 and give them a horizontal padding of 2. Which means we've got to remove some margin right here. Okay, now we have a lot of select field, but none of them have any options, so let's fix that. If I go onto my utils/options file, you can see that we have all of those options defined here, so minute, hour, day, week, month, and frequency. So let's use that on our Paparazzi scheduler component. In our script section, we will import them here. So that is frequency options and months options and day options, week options, hour, and finally minute options. Now for them to be available in our templates, let's define them as data attributes. And this is not happy because, oh yeah, forgot to import it from the utils alias. Okay, so now we can go back to our template and start using these options. So we'll give this options equals frequency options, and we'll do that for all of the select fields. Okay, so now we have some human-friendly options in each of our select fields. So the next step would be to hide some of those select fields based on the frequency that we choose. For example, if we are choosing once a day, then we do not need the user to select the month, the day, or the weekday at all. And of course, the Cron field should only be displayed when we choose custom. But the problem is, all we are given from the parent component is a Cron expression, which is right here. So from that expression, not only we need to deduct the frequency, the month, the day, the weekday, the hour, and the minute, but we also need to find a way to update the Cron expression whenever one of these select field changes. And before we can do all of that, we need to have a little Cron expression crash course. So a Cron expression, at least in PHP, is composed of 5 parts. The first one is for the minutes, and it can be anything between 0 and 59. And if instead of providing a numeric value, we provide a star, that means we want the Cron expression to run every minute. And that patterns apply for all the other parts of the Cron expression. We can either provide a numeric value or provide an asterisk for all of those values. So as I said, the first part is for the minute, the second for the hours, the third for the day, the fourth for the month, and the last one is for the weekdays. So if it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. So that expression as it is, with 5 asterisks, will basically run every minute. Now if I replace the asterisks with, let's say, 30 on the minute part, that will make the Cron expression run every hour at half past. And that is basically the pattern that we will be using for hourly frequencies. Now, if we want to move to a daily frequency, all we have to do is provide a specific hour. So in this case, if we provide 22, then that means it will run every day at 10:30 p.m. Now, if we go one step further and provide 1 as a day, then it will run on the first day of each month at 10:30 p.m. And finally, we can reach a yearly frequency by providing a specific month. So in this case, this will be every year on March the 1st at 10:30 p.m. Now, the weekday part is a little bit less intuitive because it doesn't really fit on the minute, hour, day, month scale that we've used so far. Instead, you can see it as an additional filter that helps you ensure a cron job is run only on a specific weekday. So if we wanted a job to run once every Monday, we would have to remove the specific day and the specific month. So in that example, the cron expression will run every Monday at 10:30 p.m. Now you can see that we've managed to map our predefined frequencies with some cron expression patterns. In this drawing, I've written this as a regular expression. So \d plus is when we provide a specific number, and \* means we are providing the literal asterisk to the cron expression. So this is how we are going to recognize a frequency from a given cron expression. And anything that doesn't fit in those patterns will use the custom frequency. Okay, now in order to display and update those cron expressions, we will give each of its parts an index. And these indexes match what you would get if you'd use the split method on the cron expression using a space as a delimiter. Now, thanks to these indexes, we can create two functions. One called getPart, which will simply return the value of the cron expression at that index. And one called setPart, which will update the cron expression at that index with the new value. Okay, so let's implement that, and we'll start by implementing those two new methods, getParts and setParts. Okay, so to access the parts at that index from the cron expression, all we have to do is get an array from that string using the space delimiter and then use that index. So that's const part equals this dot value dot split using the space delimiter, and then we'll use the index position. Now that part is going to be a string, and that might be what we want when it's an asterisk, but when it's a number, we will want that number as an integer and not as a string. So what we'll do is we'll try to return that part passed as an integer, but if the result of that integer is not a number, then we will simply return the part as a text. Otherwise, that means that the part is an integer, so we will return that as an integer. For the setPart method, we will transform the cron expression as an array, again using the space delimiter. And we will simply set the array at that index to that new value. Now all we have to do to alert the parent component of the new value of the cron expression is to emit an input event. And we will send that array, but before we do, we will pass it back to a cron expression using the join method. Okay, now let's create some shortcuts for those parts as computed properties. So for example, we can access the value of the minute part by returning this.getPart0. And let's do the same for the other parts. Okay, now let's use them in our template. And we'll start with the minute field. We will give it minute as a value, and we will add an input listener so that when the minute changes, we call the setPart method. So that is value setPart0 value. So now if I save this and I update the minute right here, let's say 10, you can see that our cron expression is updating accordingly. And because the cron field is actually reactive using two-way binding, if we update the minutes on the cron expression, it will automatically update the minute select field. Okay, now let's do the same for all the other fields. Okay, so let's give this a try. January, let's make that February. So that's a 2 here. Day, let's make that 3rd. So it's the 3 here. Let's change 10 p.m. with 7 a.m. 45 minutes to 30 minutes. And finally, Monday, it's do Friday. So that's 5 here. Perfect. Okay, now for our frequency, let's create a new computed property. If you remember, we've managed to identify a few patterns within our Cron expressions using regular expressions. So let's code them here. So we'll say if a certain pattern matches this dot value, then return a certain frequency, right? So let's start with the yearly frequency. For this, we need a Cron expression that starts with 4 specific parts and ends with 1 asterisk. For the monthly expression, we need 3 specific values and 2 asterisks. For the weekly frequency, we need 2 specific values, 2 asterisks, and 1 specific value. For the daily frequency, we only need the first 2 to be specific values. And finally, for the hourly frequency, we only need the first one as a specific value. And if our Cron expression doesn't match any of these regular expressions, then we will return custom. Okay, now let's use this in our template. And as you can see, the value of our frequency will depend on our Cron expression. So if I write a daily Cron by setting up 2 specific values and 3 asterisks, you can see that we have once a day here. But now we also need the other way around, which means if I select a new frequency, then this should change the Cron expression. So for that, we'll create a new method called setFrequency that we will use as an input listener. So let's define that method right here, and it will accept a new frequency. Now all we'll do in that method is we will force a new Cron expression every time a new frequency is chosen. So for example, if the user chooses once a year, then we will force it to be on the 1st of January at midnight. And if we do that, we might override what the user had already done before, but the idea is that the frequency is the first thing that is chosen by the user, so it doesn't really matter that much. And I think that implementing another strategy at this time might be a little bit overkill. So we will use a switch case on that new frequency variable. And if the new frequency is equals to yearly, then we will alert the parent component by emitting a new Cron expression that matches that frequency. And we'll do the same for the other 4 predefined frequencies. And if the user chooses a custom frequency, we will give it the one that runs every minute. And let's not forget to use return statements in our switch case. Okay, so now if I save this and I choose once a year, you can see that the frequency is equals to the 1st of January at midnight. And if I choose, let's say, custom, then it's every minute. Now, one thing that we haven't done is only display the fields that are relevant to the user based on the frequency that is selected. So for example, at the moment, we're using the custom frequency, so we should only see the Cron field. Okay, so let's go back to our template and we'll add some VFs a bit everywhere. So let's start with the months. We should only see the months field if the frequency is yearly, because anything more frequent than that doesn't require the users to specify a month. So we'll only display this if frequency equals yearly. Now for the day field, we want it to be visible if the frequencies are yearly or monthly. So we'll say VF yearly and monthly includes frequency. The weekday field is quite straightforward because we should only display it if the frequency is equals to weekly. So let's copy this and set this to weekly. Now the hour and minute fields are used in quite a lot of frequencies, so it's more the case of when not to display them. And for the hour field, we should hide it if the frequency is equals to hourly or custom. So we'll write VF hourly and custom does not include frequency. And the minute field should only be hidden when the frequency is equals to custom. So that is VF frequency is not equal to custom. And finally, for the cron expression, that is exactly the contrary. So VF, the frequency is custom. Okay, so let's save this and see if it works. At the moment, we've got the custom frequency, so we can only see the cron expression, which is fine. But let's see what happens if I choose once a year. Okay, yes, so we can see the month, the day, the hour, and the minute. Let's say once a month, months disappear. Let's say once a day, day disappears. Once an hour, hour disappears. And once a week, we have the weekday and the hour and the minute. Perfect. Now, before we wrap up this video, there's one last thing that we should sort out. So if I select the custom frequency, and then I enter a cron expression that matches one of our predefined frequency, let's say every day at midnight. So I'm going to enter 0 for the hours and 0 for the minute. And as soon as our cron expression matches a predefined frequency, then we are losing our cron field, which can be quite annoying if, I wasn't done updating my cron expression. So somehow we should make sure that when the user chooses the custom frequency, it is forced to stay on that custom frequency until it chooses another one. So we'll do that by creating a new data property right here called force custom that will default to false. Next, whenever we change the frequency, we'll make sure to update the force custom attribute. And that attribute will be equals to true if and only if that new frequency is equals to custom. And finally, we will use that force custom attribute in our frequency custom property right here. So if this.force custom is true, then return custom and don't try to match the cron expression with any predefined frequencies. And finally, if we are reaching this part of the code, it means that our cron expression was originally a custom cron expression, which means that we have to set this.force custom to true. Okay, let's give this a try. So if I go and choose a custom frequency, and I choose every day at midnight, then we are still in the custom frequency and we're not being redirected to a once a day frequency. Okay, so that was everything for the Paparazzi scheduler. And actually it looks like we've got too much padding here now. So let's just go back to our Paparazzi show settings components. And on the scheduler section, there should be an extra padding here to remove. Yeah. Okay, so that's everything for our Paparazzi scheduler. In the next episode, we will actually reuse that component because we will be designing a page that allows users to create a new paparazzi.